All right, welcome on to a special Monday edition of Dunc'd On. And I want to remind everyone that today is the last day to get 25% off either your first month or, even better, your first year of Dunc'd On Prime. So highly recommend giving that a shot. You've got about 24 hours or so left. I'll probably turn it off tomorrow morning when I get up. So encourage you to do that, and you are well familiar with all of the Dunc'd On benefits at this point in time, all the Dunc'd On Prime benefits, I should say. So Stack Show got a little bit of news to get to. Still, most of the stuff we got to on Saturday has held up. Then we have to catch up on our WATFOs, which is what are the, so public probably will say freaking odds for this one, but you'll know what we mean, where Danny and I pick events that we think might happen in the future and assign probabilities to them. There are a bunch that have actually come through that we need to review. And then we're going to come up with some new ones, including at your behest in the comments. So stick around for that in the end. Let's start here, Danny, though. I thought that Paul George's podcast has always been really good. I enjoyed that. Obviously, I've never listened to a full episode because, I don't have time for that. But the clips that I've seen from it have always been really good and really revealing. And he took us through basically the entire timeline of negotiations with the LA Clippers. And given how things turned out, I have absolutely no reason to doubt him. So I'm going to assume the truth of what he said. What did you make of that negotiating strategy from the Clippers? I guess or maybe here, I'll lay it out what he said first, and then
you can
react to it.
All out there.
So he said in the fall, before Kawhi signed, they started at 2 years, $60 million. And it took like 2 months for an inch up, and they were at like $44 million, presumably still the 2 years. Then he started hearing Kawhi was going to sign. Kawhi signs for 3 years at $50 million a year. And when I said the 44 earlier, that's 44 million per season over 2 years. And then at that point, PG was like, "No, I'll just take what Kawhi got. That's fine. We're you guys see us as equal. I'll take that." And they wouldn't give him that. And then around the break, he was getting so annoyed. They also, let's remember, we're playing exceedingly well right before the break. And so he was like, "All right, let's just table discussions. Like, it's starting to impact my mood." They get back to it at the end of the season. He's like, "I played 74 games. I was healthy. One of my best statistical seasons." And at that point, they do finally get to the 3 years. And he's like, "Well, I can get 4. The season's over. Why don't you just give me the no trade? Here's where I want to be." They refuse to give him the no trade on the 3 year. I assume this is the max at this point. And he's like, "All right, well, if you won't give me the no trade, give me a 4th year." They wouldn't do that either. Philly did, and now he's a Sixer.
First of all, I agree with you on the credibility of George, the way he talks about it, and also just based on how it parallels some of the contemporaneous reporting that we had at the time, which of course could have come from Paul George, but it makes sense intuitively. But from the perspective of it being accurate, I think this makes the Clippers look pretty bad, because one of the questions that we all had was, did he want more than Kawhi? Kawhi's took a little less than his maximum. We're getting all that. And basically, if you accept George's version of events, there are multiple different iterations of this that to me would have been completely acceptable for the Clippers. And their initial offer is completely ludicrous, $30 million a year. Like, that's the type of thing that if we did in the mock-off season, you probably would have just hung up. Like, why would you start anywhere far from the max for a player who is clearly a max guy? Like, you're not gaming anything. You're not getting any anchoring there. So for me, this makes the Clippers look pretty weak, especially
Feldman-esque. No, sorry, just kidding. No,
far more egregious than Dan would do. Yeah. For a player like this, I mean, somebody who you and I have consistently had in the top 10 to 15 players in the league, even if he's older and we don't know how it's going to age. So there being multiple points where Paul George initiated, and I think that's important too, initiated an offer that I would have easily accepted as the Clippers front office. The Kawhi deal, sure, no problems asked. For me, the For me, both the 3-year with a no trade or the 4-year would have been acceptable. Which of those you prefer depends on your circumstance. And so the other thing that I wonder about is, well, what in the world did the Clippers want? Because these are all the things that he initiated, they turned down. So like, were they were trying to get 3 years, no trade, and nothing further. Like, okay, like so presumably that was what they were willing to accept. And that also, remember, that's a less team friendly deal than the one that he initiated like 3 or 4 months before.
Yeah, it really didn't make any sense to me, and I will admit I'm not one of these people who's like studied the psychology of negotiation so well or anything like that. I mean, I think with our business, some of the negotiations that we have, and there's all the mocks and stuff. I think I usually do okay. That the mocks have the additional confounder that it's supposed to be realistic, and also it's supposed to actually sound good and not be boring. But it, to me, the biggest thing that's important in negotiation is knowing when you have the leverage and when you don't. And when you do have the leverage, you use it. That's when we're the most critical of these teams, is when they do something that they didn't have to do. Right. And so this isn't necessarily about like, oh, it just showed a complete lack of emotional intelligence, which it did, of course. But it certainly did. And that's that initial offer, the 2 years 60, that's like, oh, I read about this thing called anchoring in a negotiation textbook, and I'm gonna maybe I'll try that out this time. You hear about this second apron, like that's something that I think it's in the new CBA. Oh, people don't understand it, so well, they're still relying on people not understanding what their bullshit excuses for why they didn't want to pay the guy even now. But I will credit Paul George and his negotiators, by the way, for not taking any of these deals.
Yeah.
They should not have. So, in any event, the Clippers negotiated like they had leverage when they didn't. That's what they failed to understand. They failed
And
to
as
understand.
a brief note,
Yeah.
they did the opposite, it appears, with James Harden. Where else was he going to get anything close to this? And Paul George had significantly more ties to the Clippers as a franchise, part of good years, is a better basketball player right now. And for whatever reason, James Harden gets way over market, and Paul George, they're squeezing every dime from him.
Yeah. Now they did trade for him. They under different circumstances with PG, but yeah, if you're at the point where you're offering Paul George 2 years 60, you're well aware of like the consequences down to pay guys more. And then also, Harden, once George left, they had plenty of room to just pay him anyway.
True.
And maybe they met, it might have behooved them. Maybe they actually got a shorter deal on him. Because maybe they just, they had 70 million guaranteed on the table or 75 million guaranteed on the table, whatever it ends up being. And it was better for them to just, pay more of that now because they didn't really have any opportunity cost. So the Harden thing, they knew PG was gone at that point. So I'm not as critical of that. And so it behooved them to kind of make that deal as short as possible. If they want to overpay him in the beginning to make that happen, who knows what happened there. But back to PG. Yeah. So they didn't have any leverage, and because he's just so sought after around the league. And I mean, especially to not just give him the Kawhi deal. That's the one that I really just don't understand. Like, and how much lower was that deal? Like, would it have been? I mean, they were already up to like 44 million a year. I mean, I'm guessing they probably came in at like something like 3 years and 135 or something, 45 million a year under Kawhi. But like, you already got the win on Kawhi. So just take the win on PG, and they're probably like, well, we think Kawhi is better than PG. Okay, yeah, I think like for last year he played better than PG, and he was healthy at the time, but PG had a better health record. PG also, I think, can actually bear a decline in his skills and still be valuable more than Kawhi. And he also is a way better shooter So I think that he like can age better and also fits more places than Kawhi. So again, it's just a not an understanding of the market. I just don't understand how. I mean, they were just thinking, I guess, like, and especially when you have the fucking Sixers out there, like Daryl Morey made it the most obvious that anyone ever has that he was going to maintain cap space hell or high water this offseason. Like, did they think that Daryl Morey wasn't going to make this offer? Did they think that Paul George was just going to turn it down? And this is
and Nate,
this
remember
is when,
that
yeah,
we're talking about the Kawhi offer. That's around the deadline. OG Anunoby and Siakam are functionally off the board at this point. Like, remember, those deals happened early. And so, I mean, what else are they going to use their money on? And maybe it's that, oh, he's not going to leave, but oh, you're getting too cute to save a small amount of money for a billionaire owner. Because remember, the Kawhi offer is the same duration they wanted. And by Paul George's chronology, there wasn't a no trade at that juncture. So it's like,
well, there can't have been because you're not
because it's an extension.
It would have been an extension. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean that's the other thing they fucked up is, especially given the history with Blake Griffin, don't let it get all the way to free agency, because like a lot of teams, I say, all right, just let it get to free agency, right? Like you don't need to do this extension now. Most guys, if they're happy where they want to be and you give him what the money that they want, they'll just take it. But once you're not willing to offer the no trade and he wants to be there, now you've thrown this huge monkey wrench into things where it's like, oh, well, yeah, actually they're probably just want to re-sign me to trade me. And I actually have other and better options where I can choose my destination. I thought the mock-off season negotiations were very prescient in that. And you eventually came up and made the offer and I decided to leave anyway. I don't think Paul George would have done that. He really, really wanted to be in LA. The fact that he was willing to like take all this much less and then even, would have done fewer years than he could have gotten elsewhere if he had gotten the no trade. Like that's remarkable.
And he was willing to take the 4-year offer without a no trade.
Yeah.
Like that would have been like, the Clippers turned down from his stuff 3 separate offers that, as the Clippers in the mock-off season, I would have offered Paul George and been thrilled if he accepted it. And they turned down all of those.
Yeah. And I really, like, he certainly would have had trade value unless something disastrous happened at the beginning of this season. Now, the other thing that's so crazy about it is when he was apparently willing to take the Kawhi deal, that's when everything was going great, right? Like you can maybe say as the Clippers, it's justifiable to say, okay, look, it just didn't work out. We don't see ourselves as championship contenders anymore. We're just, everyone's just too injured. And so we're okay with this era just being over and PG just leaving. Like that's semi-defensible. I still have this idea of like, have you noted that you don't have your draft pick during these years? Like, why not just keep the guy and trade him later? Or, this like, oh my God, the second April, our 2032 draft pick might get frozen. Like, yeah, you can get out of that later. We've talked all those so many times about why this whole idea of the second apron and them not like, yeah, especially because they obviously, Danny did offer the max for 3 years. Like we know that at this point. So there's no difference between the third and the fourth year, really, with respect to the second apron. If you want to say the difference between 2 and 3 years, okay, like that I get, because when you're in for that third year in a row, that's when your draft pick in the first of those years gets dropped to the end of the first round. So you would have had to obviously make some sort of a move, and they could have done that, right? If they had this Harden on a 2-year deal, they could have just let him go at that point, got below the second apron, no problem, or not re-signed Norman Powell at 33 or something. Like they would have had the ability to get below the second apron after 2 years. So it really, I just still don't understand their strategy. Maybe if I have some conversations at Summer League, I can present their side of it, which I'm not even gonna say it hasn't been done because
they sent all this stuff out.
Yeah.
And they sent all that stuff out. And they ran various different, more in the stenography field, were just putting it out there. Or, they actually just posted themselves too. It is even more frustrating in light of the kind of the public posturing, as you said, that the Clippers have done, and we have all that out there, and to me, they look pretty ridiculous in all this. And as you said, we could get more favorable phrasing and all that stuff to them, but especially because the Paul George stuff rings true, it bothers me. And these are the types of things that players, you can build a reputation, just like trading Blake Griffin after you say he's the franchise cornerstone, do all that has consequences too. You can win a trade, but that has ripple effects moving forward, and if you treat players honestly and all that. So we'll have to see where everything goes from here. I think the place I want to go for you is
one other thing too. People might be saying like, oh yeah, you really have lionized Daryl Morey for the way that he's managed to negotiate over the years, and the way he handled the Simmons situation and Tyrese Maxey, not just auto maxing him because that's what you do. You use the small cap hold to get PG and, playing more hardball with James Harden. Daryl Morey knows when he has the goods and when he doesn't, right? When he has the leverage, he uses it. You didn't see him come into the meeting with PG and be like, yeah, okay, let's start with 2 years, 60. No, he realized that PG had the leverage, and to get him, he had to give him every single thing that he wanted, and he's that good, and he can have a championship contender if he does that, and so he offered it to him, right? He knew that Tyrese Maxey is going to be a restricted free agent, and yeah, he might be annoyed to not get his max offer right away, but he'll be a restricted free agent at the end of this, and we're going to offer him a deal then, and we're still not going to give you the player option either. We're going to just make you take a 5-year max, which you're a restricted free agent, and you're going to be happy to have that. In the end, you're going to accept it, and maybe your feathers be a little ruffled, but that's what the money is for, right? So, and he knew he wasn't going to just take some bad deal because Ben Simmons was going to cry all season, or Harden was going to make things uncomfortable, right? So that's the difference. It's knowing when you actually have the goods to negotiate and when you don't.
Well, and knowing when the difference between this offer and what you want is so small. That's with the Kawhi one. It's it's maybe not exactly what you wanted, but it's okay, are we willing to accept that difference? And they weren't willing to, and that's a big mistake. Where I want to go.
And another theory that was posted. Sorry, this is
no. Go ahead. It's really interesting.
Such an interesting topic. Another theory that was posited was, well, they just couldn't pay him more than Kawhi. I mean, that seems like that wasn't the case, right? Maybe it was in terms of the years they felt like they couldn't do that in the end or something, and that's why they couldn't do the 4th year at the very end. But he said he was willing to take what Kawhi was willing to take. Maybe that's the one, if you were trying to poke holes in his story, that's the one thing you would point to as all right, maybe that's not actually true. But I take him at his word on that more than I would take the Clippers at their word at this point. So, okay. Yeah. So should we do, what's next here?
Well, next is something that happened as we were prepping our recording. So I don't know if you've seen it, which is Haywood Highsmith going back to the Heat, 2 years, $11 million, no options. 11 million.
Oh yeah, no, I fired off my tweet about how the league fucked this one up right before we started recording.
Oh, okay. Don't worry. You are not in the newsbreakers tab, so I that's the only thing I keep open while we record. So again, the story here. Thankfully, you got your tweet on it. That is the story of this. Is again, it's good team friendly deal by the Heat. Frustrating by the rest of the league. And Highsmith is a far better player than this. Age 27 now, so he'll get back out there at 29. Hopefully, these years are kind to him. But Highsmith, even if you want to believe that Haywood Highsmith is not going to make 40% of his threes, he took 5 per 36 this past year. Career 37% now because he took so much more this past year than in the rest of his NBA career. Sure, but he's a very good defender who can do enough there that I think he's going to get guarded. And so we don't need to run through the full laundry list. And maybe he took a little bit less to come back to the Heat, especially with their constraints. But for this to be, first of all, to not have an option, but also to have the annual value here I'm frustrated for him.
Exceedingly frustrated. And you think of the teams out there that should have just paid him, right? I think there's a few that come to mind here. The Indiana Pacers should have beaten this offer. They should have been willing to maybe even go 3 years. And yeah, I get that they're kind of close to the tax. Another guy I would rather have had than Obi Toppin, but they have other guys as well that they could have just moved to fit him in, or just gotten under the tax at the deadline or something if needed, right? Like that's I think they could have figured something out. Yeah, I guess they don't actually have. Yeah, Ben Matherin is probably their most disposable guy right now.
Well, you want me
But
to
yeah,
throw another
I mean
one?
they're yeah. I mean there are many others. Yeah, go ahead.
Cleveland.
Yeah.
If this is what Highsmith is willing to take, you could bring him back. They could have even had Highsmith and Okoro. You'd have to move something else to get where you want to be tax wise. But at this kind of a price, they could have done it. I mean, of course, any of these teams could have offered and should have offered a player option. I would have rather had him than Dario Saric for the Nuggets, even with the specifically good fit that Saric is with potentially theoretically Peyton Watson. I mean, there are so many teams where this could have been there, and even like
Yeah,
Memphis.
I mean, this is just another miss for the league. Like this guy is a pretty good defender, and you know, I think a guy. I mean, I would put him in the top 30 of wing defenders in the league easily, and he's been an improving shooter and somewhat improving inside the arc. He's mostly just a pure catch and shoot guy, but on the Indiana Pacers, you can afford that, right?
Yeah,
Like
and playing a scarce position where there isn't a lot out there, and so like there's so many that where it could have been useful for them. And I mean, San Antonio still has the room exception, and even though they're not at that phase, having him on this sort of a contract, I mean, this is so much better than basically. Even though we like somebody if I take it, like the ways that Detroit mismanaged their stuff, they have a lot of guys who kind of overlap in certain extent. So yeah, we don't need to go through all of them, but yeah, so extremely frustrated for him. Wish that this were different. Amazed he didn't get a player option considering what the annual value ended up being. And so we move on.
We do. And John Isaac, the saga of his deal and the details continue to come out. We have to update it. Obviously, we talked about it a lot on Saturday. That non-guarantee at the end in his deal. So he's got 3 non-guaranteed seasons. One of them is half guaranteed. And then 2 totally non-guaranteed seasons. They become fully guaranteed if he plays at least 52 games in the prior season. That seems reasonable, right?
It does. And it does. We don't know if there's like a minimum minutes, but I'm fine with that. And Jonathan Isaac hasn't played that many minutes so let's see. So 52 games. How many times I'm looking up how many times Jonathan Isaac has played 52 games season, and the answer is 2. He did that in his second year, and he did that this past year. So sure.
Okay. I should have noted when we talked about Denver in charge that there's a possibility that Denver still has this Westbrook trade coming. Now, what I believe is happening here is that there's a bit of a standoff between the Nuggets and the Clippers. The Nuggets have a trade exception from the Reggie Jackson deal that Westbrook could fit into. Remember, Westbrook opted into his player option for 120% of the minimum from last year that he signed. He signed a 1+1 at that number. So he's about $4 million or so. He can fit into that trade exception. The Denver Nuggets, though, even with Saric on board, have $14 million below the second apron, which they have plenty of room to take him in, but they know that he doesn't want to be with the Clippers. They know that the Clippers don't want him, so they're just like, okay, well, why don't you just buy him out and we'll sign him for the minimum. So this is basically about the Nuggets trying to get the Clippers to play his salary instead of them having to do it.
And there is a huge difference for Denver in terms of the tax and everything else. Not as huge as it would have been if they'd retained Caldwell Pope, of the subsidized minimum versus Westbrook at his full. And so it makes sense for Denver to see if the Clippers are going to blink. It seems like the Clippers don't want him back. So can you facilitate? And there are fewer teams, clear of the salary floor now than there were a week or two ago. So the longer they wait, the kind of more awkward this gets, but there's still plenty of time.
Oh, sorry. Let me correct something. For some reason, we don't have Saric in our likely column. So actually where Denver is 9.6 million below the second apron. So they could, it would be a little bit difficult No, it wouldn't be difficult for them to bring in Westbrook and also have Shards. They would still have enough operating room below the second apron, but they're getting into another tax ban by getting that close to it.
One other signing that has happened since the last time we reported is earlier on Monday, Daniel Tice going to the New Orleans Pelicans. And Tice's place, there was a stretch of time where he was a more exciting kind of like stretch and defend big than he is now. This will be his age 32 season, but he shot his three at least somewhat. He was at so 2.5 per 36 attempts last year with the Pacers and the Clippers combined, and then was 3.6 the year before. So as a player that you can have in your rotation, as somebody that you can go to, that's fine. I don't think they should expect to start and close with him, but I also don't think they are expecting to start and close with him. So I think this is completely reasonable.
They may have to at this point. I was going through again an Ingram deal, and it's really tough for the Pels to do anything if they're not going to move Ingram or McCollum. At this point, I was
my thought would be you do one of those and get a center back, theoretically.
Yeah, no, well, precisely. But I'm saying, like, I think it's starting to become obvious that deal is not necessarily imminent. And
yes.
maybe that'll pick back up in Vegas. Like, so they're starting to face the reality of maybe having to start the season with this roster plus a minimum center. Because obviously, they couldn't actually start the season in the tax. It is, although it was a lot easier to do that last year when Kyra Lewis was just like such an obvious dump candidate. But as I was thinking, like, oh, what if they wanted to move Jordan Hawkins as the matching salary and sweetener to go get Isaiah Stewart? And they could add another salary to that and make the trade legal, but then of course they would be too expensive. So that's they really they have so many big salaries now, like, because they're not going to move Murphy. They'd prefer not to move Hawkins. I really like Hawkins. I think they shouldn't do that unless they really get a center that they're very into. I'm not sure if Isaiah Stewart would qualify there. So I think it's like, it just has to, they have to either get a trade exception in this Ingram deal or get a center back or something. And that's proving to be exceedingly complicated. I never talked about James Wiseman. Actually, that happened a few days ago to Indiana. And it looks like he's only going to be partial guarantee year one at the minimum and then a non-guaranteed year two. If you're going to pick a place for him to possibly resurrect his career, that would be it to me.
I agree. The up-tempo way that the Pacers play, that could open up some opportunities. Caitlin Cooper's already done some good work on the potential fit of Wiseman there. His recognition defensively could be a problem with some of their units, just because of like, he's going to have to clean up messes, and James Wiseman is not the best at that because of some of his floor recognition. But you get that opportunity, and for Carlisle, I've said before that I wouldn't have, if we're running a team, I wouldn't give James Wiseman a mid contract this year. I stand by that. That is the way to go. But for the Pacers, they have other options. So if Wiseman doesn't work, first of all, it's a partial guarantee for the first year, non-guarantee for the second. You also still have Isaiah Jackson in the fold. They lost Jalen Smith, of course, to the Chicago Bulls. So it's pretty much no harm, no foul if it doesn't work out.
All right, what do we have to catch up on here from a WATFO perspective?
I'm going to broadly go in the order that we made these, but I do want to do an exception because of the things. Some of them are tied in with things that we've talked about already on this podcast. And so I thought that would be a place that we could potentially start. And the first of those, and it's really funny to think about this in the timeline of the Paul George negotiations that we were just discussing. February 20th, 2024. What are the odds that the Sixers spend more than $30 million in cap space, not counting the room exception, on players outside the organization? I said 20%. You said 35%. And of course, they did that with Paul George. And incidentally, this is right around the timing that Paul George said, I will take the Kawhi, and the Clippers said no. If we had known that at the time, we probably would have gone higher. But Daryl Morey, and this I think is a good example of how this did work out extremely well for the Sixers in many ways. And we talked about Caleb Martin last pod. there were a lot of ways that this could not have worked out. And you and I both expected it by virtue of these predictions to not work out for them in the way that it did.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when you see what some of these dudes signed for, they could have signed Oubre, Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith, basically Derek. They could have signed 5 3-and-D wings.
Well, no, but Oubre wouldn't have counted because he was outside. He wasn't outside the organization.
You're right. Yeah, he wouldn't have. But I mean, they could have brought him back still. Like, I mean, I do like at the prices that guys went for. Like, Daryl could have signed literally every decent player in free agency this year to put it around Tyrese Maxey and Joel. Other than, ironically, Nick Batum, who apparently just wanted to go back to LA.
And I mean, Milton.
Milton
got
it is a good point that you make that it could have gone. You know, it wasn't fait accompli. They're going to get Paul George, but they did.
So that one we already discussed, and then we just were on the Indiana Pacers, and May 28th, 2024, we said, will the Indiana Pacers either use the full non-taxpayer mid-level or pay Obi Toppin a starting salary at or above that? Obi Toppin is making more than the non-taxpayer mid-level. I had it as a 40% chance. You had it as a 25% chance, and it happened.
Well, you know why I put it so low is because we remember in a later episode, I discovered that I had that calculation error in my sheet.
Oh, that's
like
right.
That one column, and so I had them with less room below the tax than they actually had. That's why I fucked that up. But hey, I mean, you gotta own it. No excuses here.
No, we'll blame the second apron on that one. And so now we'll go back chronologically. The oldest standing WATFO that is resolved at this point.
That was fucking hilarious.
Is from
second apron.
Is from November 29th, 2022. DeJounte Murray will still be a Hawk at the start of the 2024-25 regular season. We were both around 50%. I said 55%. He was still a Hawk. You said 50%. He is not. He was traded, of course, to the New Orleans Pelicans.
Yeah, and this one, I mean, this is when the initial season he was there, things like weren't going amazingly well at this time. And you just were like, yeah, this is, I mean, because we weren't that high in the trade to begin with. I mean, that was obviously our prior, that this was going to like put the Hawks into some different stratosphere. Now, this was more based on, and it's actually pretty remarkable that this is how it turned out, because that the fit was so bad that it turned out this way. Recall that he could have been a free agent.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to go there.
And so my thinking was, oh, well, he's never going to extend, so they're going to have to trade him before that because it's not working out, right? And to recoup some of the value. Then he extends on a very good deal, and the fit was so bad that they still were trying to like instantly move him on that deal, even though there was no flight risk at all. So this was, I think you were slightly higher on this one than me, but the fact that we were both 50% or over on him not being a Hawk by this time, when they traded so much for him, and this was basically a month into his first season with the team, that just shows you just like how obvious it was that this was a disaster from the beginning, at least to us.
So we're not logging it because it isn't resolved. I will let listeners know that the oldest still lingering WATFO is an old chestnut for us, and that is the odds that the Kevin Huerter Sacramento pick conveys, which it did not by the skin of its teeth. It survived this year. It is protected 1-12 in 25, then 1-10 in 26. And this is one of the ones where I originally was giving you crap for being a Kings optimist, because you said it's a 50% chance it conveys, which at that time was very optimistic because this was in July of 2022. And then I said It was only 35%. It looked like it was going to go, because remember, it couldn't convey in 23. It would have conveyed in 24 if Sacramento had made it out of the play-in, which they did not. And so now they have 2 more bites at that apple. That is the one now. Next up, we move all the way from late 2022 to late 2023, December 13th, 2023, What are the odds that LeBron James and Bronny James are going to play together? I said 35%. You said 20%. And while technically speaking, they haven't played in a game yet, let's say those ducks are in a row. We can count it.
Yeah, I don't think Bronny had even debuted at this point yet. It was probably pretty close, but I guess maybe part of it was that I thought that Bronny would be a little bit better and would have maybe more options, and so that they wouldn't necessarily want to be, if he could have got drafted in the first round or something, that they wouldn't have wanted to control it to the degree that they ended up doing. I mean, once he got into the second round, if they wanted to play together, like making that happen was really made a lot of sense. So yeah, 20% was obviously way too low.
and 35% was too. And you know, we discussed how we think it's going to be and everything else like that. But it is also, I mean, there are a lot of things that change, and the heart condition. And I do you want to give any quick thoughts or while I'm thinking of it on what you've seen in Summer League, or do you want to save that for the full pod?
Yeah, I mean, I only was there on Saturday. Didn't go back on Sunday. So yeah, I mean, it was not enough to really say anything useful so far.
Okay. Then we can instead move on to teams that didn't do useful things this year on the same date, December 13th, 2023. One of our bigger disagreements in percentages that we've had in a WATFO. What are the odds that two or more teams finish the season -10 or worse, including the glass net rating? I said 41%. You said 10%. 3 did. Not just 2. 3 did. The Hornets, the Blazers, and the Pistons. So so that one counts. I mean, I was still below 50%, but closer to a win for yours truly.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about this again in a second here, because there's a lot of talent around the league. The 65 game rule made sure that like a lot of that talent was playing at least early in the season. And so you had a lot of teams looking terrible in the beginning of the season, and then you throw in the tank at the end, and this draft coming up. I mean, that was part. I was like, oh, this isn't the greatest draft. And I thought a lot of these teams like Detroit and San Antonio would get better, and San Antonio did. This is another one from that time. This is, I believe, right after the Pacers make it to the final of the in-season tournament. The Indiana Pacers, the odds of them making the second round of the playoffs, and I gave it a 25% chance. You gave it an 18% chance. I would actually say, and then they also traded for Siakam too, which we didn't know was going to happen at the time.
Correct.
So boosting their odds. And they still wouldn't have made it if they had played, the East top 4 had been healthy. I don't think they would have beaten a healthy Miami either. I mean, they played reasonably well at times in the playoffs, but I also felt like their 2 losses to the Bucks were, I thought, really bad. They easily could have lost that game 3 as well. Like Tyrese hits the big shot. They obviously could have very easily lost to the Knicks as well if Nembhard doesn't hit his shot, and obviously OG and basically everyone else on the Knicks getting injured. So like they were not, to me, one of the 5 best playoff teams in the East. I think I kind of had them locked in as like a team that, was probably in the 6 to 8 range, and I think that's what they were. But a team like that, yeah, you can get some injury luck. You make it to the second round, about 25% chance. I mean, 25% chances happen a quarter of the time.
I think that it does kind of bear our analysis out, even though we ended up getting it wrong, where you kind of get into that. Well, we didn't think they were going to be good enough to do it. They weren't, and then something else happened. So like it is that is the risk that exists within this. But I'm totally comfortable with it. Next up, January 8th of 2024. The odds that the Pistons would not finish with the worst record in the East. So I said it was a 1 in 3 chance that they would not. You said it was a 40% chance that they would not. They were in this long-standing race with the Washington Wizards. It looked like Washington was going to have that spot. Instead, the Wizards ended up passing the Pistons, though hilariously not to Detroit. Washington ended up with a better draft pick than them. So we were both, and that is what occurred.
Yeah, I think we had it right though, at both you being 33%, me being 40% chance on that. I think I mean, because it was like a 3 or 4 game lead for the Pistons at that point to have the worst record, and we were like, yeah, don't cut out these Wizards, baby. This is another one right after the deadline. We knew that the Raptors would probably be heading pretty hard in the direction of trying to keep their pick. Then, of course, everyone got injured. I'm sure they kept some guys out as well towards the end, but they ended up having the 6th worst record. But of course, were not able to keep their top 6 protected pick because if you finish the 6th worst record, you don't have a greater than 50% chance of keeping that pick. As it turned out, it drops down to 8th. But you and I said 12% chance for you, 10% chance for me that they would actually make it to the 5th worst record, because I knew you had Charlotte, Portland, San Antonio, Washington, Detroit. That was proved too tall a task in the end, although they did try mightily. Next one here. A number 1 or number 2 seed loses in the first round this year. This is again at the deadline. So we know Embiid is out. He's had the surgery at this point. Looking like the West had solidified into at least a top 4 with the Clippers, including the eventual 3. And then in the East, you didn't really, the Celtics were going to be 1. You didn't really know who number 2 was going to be. Could have been Bucks, could have been Cavs, could have been obviously the Knicks, who ended up getting it. Knicks were probably the team that we thought was going to get it. So that I think when you look at, I said 20% chance. Danny, you said 10% chance that that a number 1 or 2 seed would lose in the first round this year, which of course happened last year twice. I think even just that Sixers Knicks series, because that was part of the calculation for me, I would say the Sixers had a 20% chance of winning that series easily if you look at how it played out. And then there were 3 other series it could have happened in too. And I think the Lakers, or like a healthy Pels as well, like had they gotten the right match, like if the Lakers had gotten OKC, I would have given the Lakers a 20% chance of winning that series too. So, all right, well, I guess I can take a question here while Danny is waiting to reconnect. How much are we going to penalize the Clippers for fumbling PG in the organization rankings? Oh, I think quite highly. I mean, it really starts with, I would say, 3 things. Number 1 is just somehow not having any shooting on the roster the last couple of years. And just, I don't think they actually have like a great understanding of what wins basketball games. Let's see here. There we go. Hi. That's been kind of an issue too. I mean, they were like, okay, well, we need a center and we need a point guard. It's like, nah, you got these 2 amazing wings. Like, their best era of basketball was this great spacing period in 2021, which they managed to make the conference finals without Kawhi because they played that way. And I do think it's become a little harder to play that way now than it was back then. But that's number 1, that they just, all right, we got to trade for like Plumlee, and we're going to like really the death knell. Like some of the guys they had to try to play 5 out, those guys just didn't have it anymore, like Morris and Rob Covington. But I don't understand, like, the problem was the players, not the philosophy. And then they signed, once they got Plumlee and Westbrook on the team, they're just like, yeah, this team's gonna have no shooting at all. So that was not great. And then prioritizing getting James Harden, which I just didn't really think was that great, over even when things were going well, because he just is not like a good playoff player. It's like, okay, you can raise your floor a little bit in the regular season, and that's somewhat important, but obviously wasn't that important because they pushed hard in the regular season, and then Kawhi ended up not being able to play in the playoffs due to an overuse injury. So that wasn't great either. I mean, maybe they're just like, well, we got to play Kawhi less, but then they didn't play Kawhi less once they got Harden. And then they trade away 3 more years of control of their draft. And then it just, once you've done that, to then not also re-sign PG, and like the way they've handled the messaging on it has been terrible. So yeah, I mean, they gotta, and also I guess another thing too is just that being the capacity to spend more doesn't matter as much. So like that used to be a big component of them being ranked higher, is like, oh, we can always outspend guys. Like they still, I'm sure, are willing to do that for the right team, but it doesn't matter as much now. So that's a smaller percentage of the pie than it's been in the past. So yeah, they surely will be much lower. What are the chances Jarris Walker gets traded by the deadline? I would say very low, because either he's going to play well or no one's really going to want him. That's how I think it would play out. Do you think the flattened odds are too severe for the bottom teams in the league, i.e., my terrible Pistons? I did talk about this when they got the 5th pick again, that in the aggregate, they've gotten lucky, in my opinion, because they got the number 1 pick in 2021. And they got Kate. Like, not now, if you just look at the potential value and the chances of moving up. Now, if they got the 4th pick in 2021 and then the 5th pick, like, no, then I think you could say they've been a little unlucky. But this has been about right, I would say, maybe even a little bit above, because of getting that number 1 pick. I do think that tanking is like kind of a scourge. However, I wouldn't say that this has really helped it that much. Maybe you can argue that the flattened odds have helped, like tanking in like the summer, to where you're not just like hinky ass creating this absolutely terrible roster that has no hope. Even then, though, I think that was an overstated, um, risk, should we say, that everyone was going to start doing that. Like that Sixers team, it was unique because they just happened to draft guys in 13 and 14 who were both going to miss the season very high. Like how many drafts have a projected top 5 pick who's projected to miss the whole season? Like it really was an absolute perfect storm in so many ways. Like nobody would have been complaining about those Sixers teams if they just drafted Nerlens Noel and Joel Embiid those years and they were able to play, right? They would have had a rookie on there. Like all of these little things like played into the storyline of how they just weren't that they weren't trying to compete, and the like general garden variety not competing.
So we're still on February 20th, 2024, right after the deadline. We did a big WATFO episode then. And the Wolves or Thunder making the 2024 NBA Finals, I had it at 19%. You had it at 38%. There were stretches of time where that looked significantly more likely, sometimes where it looked less likely. It did not end up happening, of course, as the Dallas Mavericks made the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I think even in retrospect, would you agree that my 38% chance was closer?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, I mean, Wolves made it to the conference finals. Thunder almost beat the Mavs as well. I mean, we were very, very close to it just being guaranteed with Thunder versus Wolves in the conference finals. So,
well, but I mean, I guess if
yeah.
Denver had made it out, if they'd won that game 7, which they very well could have, then they probably would have been the ones out. I think Denver would have won that series.
Against Dallas. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think, but most people were thinking, I guess, like Denver at that time would have been thinking Denver Clippers. But I was like, yeah, I mean, these teams are going to be the top 2 seeds in the West probably, and as it turned out, Denver was able to get in there in the end. And there are certainly things that could have happened that would have made it less likely that the Wolves and Thunder made it, like Denver not blowing a 20-point lead in Game 7.
Sure.
Here's the next one. On 2/27, the Boston Celtics winning the NBA championship. You gave it a 35% chance. I gave it a 2% chance. And as it turned out, like with the path that they had, like if they had to go through that path, 100 times, they probably make it win the championship like 75 times out of that path. But they also could have easily faced a Bucks team or a Sixers team that wasn't as injured as they were, or a Knicks team that wasn't as injured as they were. And they could have been more unlucky with health, where those teams were luckier. Like that could have easily happened. They also could have faced the Denver Nuggets or the Wolves. I think either of those teams probably would have put up a better fight against them than the Mavs did. It just, in the end, it turned out to not be a very good matchup for the Mavs. I would also say that the Mavs played well, and I do think it's revisionist history. Like, oh yeah, the Celtics were always going to kill the Mavs. Like they were great. Like we probably even were underrating how good the Celtics team was at that point in time.
Yeah,
but you got to remember how well things work. So I think this ended up being too low. But if I had to go back in time and say we're going to play out what from February 27th 100 times, I would put it closer to like 50%, but not above that.
Especially because while the Celtics had one injury, they didn't have a cascade, and they were significantly healthier than their opposition, which is the other relative measure that's useful to discuss. On that same date, the odds that Pascal Siakam gets at least $140 million in guaranteed money this year on this contract. One of the questions was basically duration, and then the other one was annual value. That's why you and I like to do it sometimes in overall guaranteed money. This did happen for Siakam, 4 years, $189 million or thereabouts for him. I said a 68% chance of happening. You said 62.
So this one I was just probably too low on. Even you probably were. Although, what happens if they just lose in the first round like they should have? Not sure. I think, but I think it still ends up being more than 140 million. But in the end, there was little to no negotiation. Not a trade that gets done without understanding what the parameters are. And for little Indiana, who never trades for players like this, obviously they just have to give him the max. They didn't give him the 5 years, no player option, so that they at least got something out of it. But in the end, this was just too low.
It was. And then the last one that is resolved was on that same date. This has, of course, been a curiosity for me, going back to the Raptors actually pulling this off a year ago, that the odds that the Oklahoma City Thunder would lead the NBA in both forcing the most turnovers and committing the fewest. As I said, the Raptors had done the year before. I believe as we recorded this, the Thunder were either first in both or first in one and second in the other. I said it was only a 26% chance of happening. You said it was 35, and it ended up not happening. While the Thunder did force the most turnovers, they committed the third least turnovers, so they did not do the double.
And then this one, it technically has not been resolved yet, but I wanted to mention it anyway.
Sure.
Of whether D'Angelo Russell gets more than 55 million guaranteed on his next contract. This is right after I believe the Lakers got eliminated. And you said 41% chance. I said 60% chance. Well, he opted into 17 million.
So he's not on his next contract.
Yes, exactly. It's technically, but he clearly didn't have that out there. Now, maybe Orlando could have been it if the KCP goes elsewhere. I mean, it really seems like Philly getting Paul George totally upended the market. All right, let's do some of these ones here in the comments before we get to the ones that we generated.
Yeah, I think to me, the juiciest of the ones that we got is, what are the odds that Lauri Markkanen ends the 24-25 season as a member of the Utah Jazz?
Yeah, you want to take that one?
Sure. I'll walk you through my thought process a little bit. I think, and have thought for a while, that the chances that Markkanen gets traded this offseason are lower than some think, in part because I don't think the kind of asset return that Danny Ainge is looking for is going to be out there. If I'm not even saying anchoring on the Mikal Bridges 5 first-round picks or anything like that. It's just that you could do that kind of value through some stronger players or anything like that. I don't think Markkanen's going to get all the way, in part because he's 1 year from free agency, in part because he's like, there isn't that kind of like wow factor with him, as good of a player as he is. So I think that's a little bit lower than expected. And the other reason why I'm going to go lower on this is because I genuinely believe, as of now, that Lauri Markkanen would like to stay in Utah. We haven't seen him push any buttons yet, and it would have been so much better for him if that's what he wanted to have done so before this point, because teams have used up their cap space. There aren't as many options that are available. Teams have made commitments, whether you want to talk specific teams or just in general. So, and if he wanted to do that, that would be an easy way, like, and that could be as extreme as I will not sign an extension with you or anything else like that. So I think the status quo is that Lauri Markkanen finishes the season on the Jazz. That can change through how the season goes, through a change of heart, whether it relates to how the season went. And also, like, I don't think there's much of an expectation the Jazz are going to be like super good this year. So I'm going to go, and I think this is going to be really low relative to what other people would say. I'm only going to go with 36%.
This is a really tough one. I mean, there are so many interesting layers to this. The fact that the Jazz are in this rebuild, that they have actively taken steps to make themselves a worse team in the Markkanen era. Now, of course,
wait, sorry, quick. 36%, 64% that he stays on the Jazz. We'll say that he finishes.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I got it. Yeah. The question is, yeah. Okay. Yeah. The odds that he ends the season with the Jazz, 64%. So there's so many components to this. I mean, they've made themselves worse. And now there's Danny Ainge he's in on everybody, right? So they were in on Drew. They're supposedly in on Bridges. Then you're going to try to get PG to come there. Like, there's a lot of stuff they're supposedly trying to do. But I don't see a way to make them better around Markkanen. They have a top 10 protected pick this year, although worth noting, it does go down to top 8 protected the next 2 years. So, and 26 draft is supposed to be pretty good also. And that's, once you're looking at 2-3 more years of picking basically in the top 10 for 5 consecutive years, that's a tough sell, maybe even for Danny Ainge at that point, no matter how many assets you're getting. But they can always make a trade to get up to where, they're at least in playoff contention. In terms of maximizing the value of Markkanen, I think it's probably higher if you can renegotiate and extend him, particularly if you could get him to agree to something that isn't the max going forward. I don't know that they will be able to do that necessarily, because it seems like if he gets traded somewhere, he's going to get the max there.
Sure.
Like you said, you're like, well, maybe the league doesn't value him. It's like, well, but he clearly has more value than like Brandon Ingram. He's like the biggest guy on the trade market right now. So how does that equate to him not getting a max? But I've been surprised before, as recently as, about an hour and a half ago with Haywood Highsmith. So, and then there's this component of, you can renegotiate and extend him, right? You said he doesn't want to be out of Utah. That's because that's where he can get paid way more for this year. They could pay him $25 million extra this year that no one else can pay him if they renegotiate and extend him. And then there's literally one day on which he could be traded this season, which would be the trade deadline. So all of those things coming in, I think the Jazz would like to move him. It probably makes sense for where they are at this point in time. Like, make no chance that you're going to not keep that top 10 protected pick. Try to get into the top of this draft, which, as I said, I've been very impressed by from what I've seen from it so far. I'm going to put it a little lower. I'm going to say 45% chance that he is on the Jazz after the trade deadline. And I think it would have been more interesting to say at the start of the 25-26 season, but that wasn't the question. So, yeah, I'll say 45% chance that he makes it past the trade deadline on the Jazz. And if he didn't have the ability to renegotiate and extend, I would say way lower. Way lower. Because there's just no reason for them to keep him. There's no reason for him not to get out of there. Just get to your next destination with the full board rights. Utah might not even want to pay you because they're not trying to be good.
So the one from Godwin, what are the odds that Brandon Ingram gets traded before or at the trade deadline?
I'm going to put this one on. I'm tempted to go lower than most people would say because it has proved kind of a difficult situation. Can his agent get him some, like, where it's not even about where he's going to get traded so much as where is he going to get traded that's going to pay him more than the Pels? Because why wouldn't you just take the extension now if you're him? So that's like, who is trading for Brandon Ingram to then give him a 30% of the salary cap max contract? That's where you start to run into some issues. You also, like, he's not a fit the way a Paul George is as a 3-and-D wing with the way that he wants to play. So the question is he going to be traded before the deadline? What are the odds he's traded before the deadline?
Traded on or before the deadline, yeah.
I'm going to actually say below 50%. I was like 45%.
Yay, we could have another one with a big disagreement. So you said you said 45?
Yeah.
I'm going 82. And the reason why is because we have already seen David Griffin articulate that they need some changes. And I agree with him, first and foremost. That's come up previously. I don't think that there are sufficient changes for the Pelicans that do not involve Brandon Ingram. Because CJ McCollum, they brought in DeJounte and they get there. But also, like, you're right that there isn't necessarily that clear-cut suit right now. But there's a long time for that to change. And New Orleans' appetite for spending this kind of long-term money and everything else. And unlike with Markkanen, I think this is another good way to assess the value of those two players. I think that it's also the Pelicans' appetite for giving him that 30% contract. And so if they're in January going, well, crap, whether the season is going well or poorly, as long as it's not fantastically, that if they still don't want to give him that contract, well, then you might as well move him and get something there. And so I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's more likely to be CJ, but it's more, I think they just kick the can down the road, do some sort of an extension. And I mean, eventually I do think he needs to be moved. And you're thinking about but if they could find a way to get off of CJ McCollum for next year, then they could actually fit Ingram in and re-sign Trey Murphy as well. And I think maybe it just ends up kind of being more of a dump with CJ. Maybe you attach something to him. That's how you get your center in. I think he's a tough guy. Like, I completely agree with you with, like, that they want to trade him, that it doesn't fit there. Like, the Bulls really want to trade Zach LaVine too. Not that those guys are in quite comparable situations.
Let's see them end up on the same team.
Okay. Actually, if you have one queued up,
I do. I have one that I've been interested in, and I will tell you that I am open to a little bit of negotiation on one part of this, which will make sense. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a preamble. The Denver Nuggets starting five had a plus 13 net rating last season, and
this is your own one.
This is my own.
Okay.
So plus 13 net rating last season, plus 12.7 in 21-22 when they won the title. We know that starting five is dead and buried. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is somewhere else. What are the odds that the five sum of Murray, Christian Brown, Michael Porter Jr., Gordon, Jokic, so it's the same starting five, just with Brown in place of KCP, has a cleaning glass net rating at 9 or better, plus 9 or better for the 24-25 regular season?
Okay. I'm fine answering that one.
I was just thinking, do you want to make it 9 or would you want to make the clean the glass net rating number different?
9 seems good. That seems fine for me. And you're
yeah.
I'm gonna say 70%.
That was the exact number I was gonna say. I'll go 72.
You're not supposed to do it that way.
We can't have the same number as that is I'm not okay with that.
All right.
Slightly off.
All right, let's do this one actually from Emma before we
Sure.
transition to one of mine. What are the odds that Trae Young signs another contract with the Hawks? We'll rule out a sign and trade on this one, by the way.
Yes.
That he signs, well, or so it could be an extension,
yes,
or a new contract. He doesn't have to be on the Hawks during that extension. It's just that he signs it with them.
Like DeJounte, that would count.
Yeah. And while you're thinking, I'll give a little background on where Trae's at for the listeners. So he makes $43 million this year, $46 next year, and then not an ETO, player option for $49 in 26-27. So he is extension eligible actually right now. He's extension eligible right now for a 3-year extension. But the situation wouldn't come to a head probably until next offseason. What do you think?
Whenever a team has listened to offers on a player, I think it's a lot more likely the Hawks not controlling their draft for the next couple of years colors that, because the incentive of trading him is different. %40. So part of me is like, that's way too high. Then part of me is like, that's way too low. So I think I'm about right then, because it's like, so I think he could get traded in the next 6 months to a year. He could get traded in the next 6 weeks. Now I'm going to go 35. I think there's a distinct chance that he does that. But Trae Young, like the Hawks are going to have the capacity to pay him money. They can commit to it early. And we've already seen players, you can get your money lined up and then you could always make your way out after that.
I believe 60%. I'm going over.
Wow.
Because they've moved Murray and they don't have their picks. So what are they doing? He's a pretty good floor raiser. And they've got all these other like young guys at these positions. I think he's another one of these guys who's actually, particularly when they don't have their picks, is probably worth more to them than to another team. I think they tried to find out what his value was. There wasn't anybody who's coming in with an overwhelming offer. Like the situation is going to come to a head in the next year. He's either going to extend or maybe need to be traded at that point. And I mean, are they going to just not offer him anything? I mean, even the last year of this is 26-27. They still owe the pick to San Antonio then. So why not get him? I mean, I think the only thing that could complicate it if he's like, okay, max or nothing, motherfuckers, right? Like that's like, if that's all he's willing to take, then yeah, you don't give him that. But if he's willing to take, something reasonable, like about what he's making now on a 3-year extension, I think I would do that. But I think there is plenty of reason for these parties to come to an agreement. Now, I want to see how he's going to play this year without DeJounte. How well Risa Shea and Johnson develop is going to be a big component of this as well. Are they just so terrible with him that it's like, why not just get rid of him anyway? But then if they're that bad, then nobody's going to want Trae Young either necessarily. So I think there is a greater than 50% chance now that the Murray deal has happened. I would have said lower than that probably before the Murray deal. Okay, my turn here. I teased this one earlier. What are the chances that 4 or more teams will finish the 24-25 season with 60 or more losses?
4 or more teams with 60 or more losses. Let me pull up.
And that did occur last season.
It did occur last season. And I think it did not the year before that.
It's a rarity. It is a relative historical rarity.
There definitely are going to be some bad teams this year. A lot of them, of course, occurring within the Eastern Conference. So the year before, so in the 22-23 season, not only were there only 3, but the 4th team was at 55, and then the 5th team was at 49. So, and that wasn't a shortened season or anything like that. So that would be a much greater concentration of bad teams, which I think is reasonable to assert.
Yeah, there were 5 teams that had 60 losses last year, by the way.
There really were.
And then the Raps had 57.
And then another kind of useful data point on that is like, well, so that's a 22 win season. If you want to know what a 22 win season is like in cleaning the glass differential, it's about I think it's like a negative 8 clean the glass net rating is about what that would be. And San Antonio underperformed their clean the glass net rating. That's how they got there. It sounds like it's a good draft class, though it seems we'll see where Cooper Flagg is. I'm sad that I didn't get to see him at the Hoop Summit this past year. He doesn't appear to be a Wembanyama necessarily level player. So they're that kind of like, I need to be at that spot, but they've also flattened the lottery odds. I'm going to go. I'm thinking about whether I want to look through some rosters here.
I don't recommend it.
No, it's a pretty. I'm going to go 18%.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is my thinking is more that I just think there are just too many good teams. Like, there are too many talented teams. Like, if you really, I mean, the top 8 in the East, we'll get to that too. And then, the West, I mean, you've got the top 10 teams. I mean, the Clippers are poised to take a step back there. None of the other teams are like, I think, really going to be that much worse on paper. And then you've got Houston should be better this year. You got the Grizz coming back into things as well this year. Now, somebody will be injured and fall off, but I just think we're going to see this stratification for a while here of like teams that just don't have it at all. And then, so I mean, here are the teams that I think, like the Nets, absolutely a candidate. Now that they have their pick back. Wizards, Pistons, Blazers,
Hornets.
Yeah, I mean, not on paper a 20 or a 22 or lower win team. And then you put the Jazz probably in that category too. Those are our contenders. Raptors probably have too much talent.
Then
could
of course
have a team that just gets injured and
I mean, Memphis lost 55 last year, but a team like that could lose more.
I'm gonna go with 55% chance.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
I mean, remember last year teams like weren't even trying to be bad at the start of the year.
But I think there were more teams that were. I mean, like, so for example, for me, San Antonio, I think is going to be beyond that. They shouldn't have last year. They significantly underperformed their differential. And then I think Portland's going to be more competitive. Charlotte, I hope, will be more competitive. So yeah, I think but it's
like they could be more competitive, but like these teams above them like all got way better too, right? Like that's the thing where I'm just like, yeah, they should be more competitive, but they just like, how are they going to win games? Whether they're more competitive or not. I don't know. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I mean,
no.
I
think
like, Detroit should be better. Washington should be a little better. Like,
the amount of joy I'm going to have if the reason that this goes is because Fred Vinson gets the Pistons to shoot slightly well enough would be pretty funny. I don't think that's going to be what happens. I think the Pistons are going to lose 60, but if it is, yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable difference of opinion because like I think we agree on the number of bad teams. It's just going to be how bad are the bad teams going to be, and the reduced incentive because these things run together. If I'm right and they're just a little bit better, then there's not going to be as much of a race to the bottom. Also, these teams, like I mean, the Blazers probably notwithstanding, they don't have as much to tear away at the deadline, which I think is compelling. Like for Washington, they already did the Avdia trade. I mean, they could do something with Kuzma now or later. Anyway,
we don't know if Tyus Jones will be back there either. That'll be interesting.
Correct. Yes. So one that this was on your list from a while ago, but I have two more that I have mentioned, but I don't love either of them. So we'll just put it in. We're not logging them as. What are the odds that Joel Embiid Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey all play in the Philadelphia 76ers next postseason game?
Okay, yeah, I had this as the chances that they are healthy, that each of them play in every 2025 playoff game. Do you think that's better, or do you think just the first playoff game?
Well, so I mean, it's do you? I think it's so. The question it's well, which do you think? So it's whether they start healthy or they stay healthy.
Well, because it's basically I think it's the reason I like my conception of it is if you're building the team, that's kind of the analysis that you're
okay. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Like that's
I'm fine with that. So Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey. It changes the odds, but that's fine. All play.
Well, or yeah, I guess should we say, let's do this. That none of them miss a game in a series that the Sixers lose.
Miss a game in the next playoff series that the Sixers lose?
Yes. Well, if they win the championship and one of them misses a game, that would kind of ruin, right? So it's yes. Whether the odds that they
or NBA Finals if they make it, or 2020 or 2025. And is it this year, or if the Sixers somehow miss the playoffs, is it?
No, I mean miss the playoffs is a loss.
We just throw it as
No. If they miss the playoffs, clearly that happened because they were also
injured.
Yeah, so I like that's part. It's basically just like trying to come up with a way to quantify the health risk for the Sixers is the point of this. So here, let's do it this way. The odds that one of the big three misses a playoff game in a series that the Sixers lose this season, or that they don't make the playoffs at all.
Yeah. Okay. I think I have it phrased that way in the document. So now we're phrasing it in terms of the likelihood that somebody misses. I wish I wasn't putting it this high, but 78%. I mean,
well, Maxey's pretty healthy.
Maxey's pretty healthy, but it's just like
I mean, even PG. I would give PG a greater than 50% chance on his own of making it through the playoffs.
Yeah, but would I give Joel?
I guess the other component that this isn't capturing though is Joel Embiid has 5 meniscus tears in his knees and he's limping around out there and not playing at his usual level.
Yeah, but I mean there isn't a perfect way to do this.
Quantify that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like we could trust ourselves to be
miss a game, like, or yeah, we could do miss a game or is severely limited.
Yeah, like because like last year, I mean, any series except for 2020, we would have said that he was limited by injury, right? Like in his career, I think we can be honest about when he's limited and when he isn't.
I won't change my odds with that.
Yeah, you said 78% chance. I'm going to go, I think it might be, is it a 78%? Historically, it's been a greater than 78% chance just for Embiid. Yeah, I'll be charitable and go 70%. But, I mean, a 30% chance of having the second best team in the East on paper is probably worth it.
So I'm going to throw one out there and I'm going to see whether you like this enough to include it. I will not be hurt if you don't, because it's a little bit weird. The odds that Klay Thompson has both a higher 3-point percentage and 3-point attempt rate per 36 minutes than Buddy Hield for next regular season.
Yeah, I don't think that one's that exciting.
Okay.
I'm not as big a fan of these like statistical ones. Who cares about the stats over 82 games? Like,
I'm just hopeful we have a point next season where I could bring back the turnover one again. I just hope it seems close. And I mean, it might be the Thunder again.
I have.
There's one in the comments that I want to do too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
No, if you have one, let's do one of yours.
Well, here I have 3. I'll let you pick the next one. Kawhi finishes this contract that he's on as an LA Clipper.
Okay.
One of the bad 7 in the East finishes the regular season in the top 8. And one of the projected top 4 in the West, Minnesota, OKC, Dallas, and Denver, do not finish in the top 4 in the regular season in the West.
Oh, let's do the top 4 in the West.
Okay.
So it's what are the odds that a team. So I guess we'll surface it that one or more of Dallas.
Of Minnesota, OKC, Dallas, and Denver don't finish in the top 4 in the West.
Not finish with one of the 4 best records with a top 4 record in the West. I mean, clear way that it can happen due to injury, of course. Also could happen due to another team getting up there. I will say that the team that most intrigues me as potentially wrecking that party is actually the Memphis Grizzlies. I still am a believer in the talent, but of course the Phoenix Suns could do it. The Pels could do it. Others, the Lakers, conceptually, if we're going to go there. So the odds that one or more of them don't. So basically, it's it's the negative result in a certain way. A lot of these teams are really top heavy. There are some exceptions, and while their best players have been durable, you're looking at collective durability here. That makes me a little bit queasy. And I brought up Memphis and a few other teams can get there. It's regular season record. I'm going to say a 40% chance.
80%. Just picking any top 4 to be a top
to
4
stay that healthy. Yeah,
I just don't care who it is, what the circumstances are, particularly top 4, and particularly in this West where they're definitely. I mean, like the Mavs finished 1 game ahead of Phoenix last year,
but they brought in their talent mid-season, and they should be.
Yeah, sure, but like I mean, just the chances that one of those teams won't have.
Yeah. Are you fine with me? Are you fine with me going up to 45?
Yes. Yeah, but I think this is one of those things where like people are just like, oh yeah, it's clearly those top 4. It's like,
sure,
yeah, on paper, I agree with you, but the season isn't played on paper. And even if all these teams are healthy, I don't know for sure that I would feel that strongly.
Now I'm regretting.
No, I'm allowed to convince you.
I know you are.
That's much more exciting to me than getting.
Yeah, well, because so the thing, so I'm lower on the rest of the teams, but the combined risk of the rest of the teams plus one of these teams doing worse, I'll go to 60. Yeah, because there's so many things. The point people bring this up all the time, like I say this all the time. There's like there are a lot more ways for a season to go wrong than go well, and I think that's a salient point here. Okay, the last one that I
do really want to. Can we really quickly do that one about the East too? Because it's in the same vein. So your top 8 in the East, the same top 8 from last year. Miami, Philly, Indiana, Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, New York, and Boston. And then here's your bottom 7.
Wait, so the question is that a team that didn't make the playoffs this year in the East makes the playoffs or has a top 8 record?
No. This is just over the regular season. I'm eliminating the variance caused by the play-in. This is over the course of the regular season that one of the bad 7 in the East, as we see it right now, finishes the regular season in the top 8. So those teams are, just hold your nose, Chicago Bulls, the Atlanta Hawks, the Brooklyn Nets, the Toronto Raptors, the Charlotte Hornets, the Wizards, and the Pistons.
It's definitely not a murderer's row. And we have seen a few of those franchises take a pretty aggressive steps back, which I broadly support. I'm supportive of what the Nets did. I'm supportive. I would be more supportive if the Bulls had done things differently, but of that point. I think it's so the teams that I think are functionally out, for me, that group is probably only Detroit, Washington, and Brooklyn, where I'm like, there isn't a path. I think the team where there is the most path is probably it's the Raptors and the Hawks.
I think the Bulls are out. I think their defense is going to be
I think they
atrocious.
should. There's a nonsense version where they aren't. But first of all, you have and now instead of it being 4 teams that can fall back to back, it's 8.
Can I ask you a question quickly though? Who is the Chicago Bulls' best player?
Oh God,
Kobe White? Ayo Dosunmu? Kobe White.
I think it's Kobe White unless Zach LaVine gets back.
Oh yeah. I mean, I guess LaVine may still be around. That's true.
I think he will be.
He would. Yeah, yeah. That's another one we could have done. I was forgetting. I had forgotten about him.
Yeah, he's many.
But have. Kobe White might still be better than him, actually. But yeah, LaVine would be the guy. But I mean, I think like their defense, like their offense, they don't have great shooting, and like their defensive personnel, they have 1.5 decent defenders on the team.
And they don't play the position of highest leverage. They also lost their best center from last year.
Sorry, we're getting too far afield here, but I'll just give my answer. Sure. I'm going to say 42% chance that one of those bottom 7 sneaks their way into the top 8.
That's a good number. I was at first thinking 35, but because of the variance that occurs, I'm going to go 47. Something weird can happen. And I think it might be one of the better teams dropping down rather than one of the worst teams making it up. Because it's just
it would have to be. Yeah. Okay. So what was your last one? We can finish up with that.
What are the odds that Julius Randle finishes the 2024-25 season as a New York Knick?
Ooh. So he's extension eligible. Very fascinating story there. Has a player option for $30 million. I actually think the odds are higher. Well, I guess I want to see what happens at center for them. Both Mitchell Robinson's health, because that would be the big need, right? Now that they've lost Hartenstein, moving him for a center is probably what would actually make them better. His fit issues didn't matter as much when he always had a big center next to him. We'll see if they can get anybody, if they can get a Chua back, or maybe they can make a lower level of trade. But they also don't have much in terms of matching salary that isn't him at this point, right? Like, because you can't trade anyone who went to Villanova, of course. And then there's also the chance that he extends. So he finishes this season on the Knicks?
Finishes the 24-25 season as a Knick.
I'll give it a 75% chance.
I'm going to go 82. And if you want to hear an extended conversation about this, Jared Dubin and I ended up going down a weird rabbit hole with this, because the problem that we both talked about is that the Knicks still need some like supplemental shot creation. They need a little bit less now, maybe with Mikal Bridges, and that you're right. Center is an important need, but it's really hard to find what the Knicks need from a non-guard because they have their guard spots filled. And so they could try to find center a couple different ways. The matching salary is a real concern. And I mean, then there's also the possibility, but I think there's also a distinct chance that Randle extends, and that he extends in a way that makes him hard to trade because he's, maybe it's the 6-month rule or something else. So yeah, I'm going to go 82%.
Are we done here finally?
I think we are.
Okay. Reminder to everyone listening on the podcast. This is your last 24 hours or so to use that code Mock Off Season 2024 to get 25% off a month, or more importantly, a year membership of Dunc'd On Prime. So highly recommend checking that out. We got lots of great stuff coming, including our breakdowns of every roster player during Summer League this season. So we will talk to y'all later this week at some point. Till then.